Let me just comment before we introduce the different speakers. Last week's event, accumulated with the shooting of 2 armed people, have shaken the foundations and credibility of this community as it relates to the community and the police department. It is shocking for those of us who were around in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s that our police department was a model for the rest of the nation, and it was embraced by the rest of the nation. Prior to 9/11, the administration in this country, among 18,000 law enforcement agencies, focused on neighborhood policing, building relationships, and building credibility and trust. Post 9/11, we saw the backdoor militarization of our police departments with equipment and weapons, and worse yet, military training. Now we're here with a solution. A solution that is 2 times in the history of our government, our democracy. 1960, the President created the Special Committee on Policing, given the beatings and the deaths and the hangings and the terrorism during the civil rights, which transformed our police department and moved things forward. And then just last year, President Obama created a task force on 21st century policing. The chair of that is the head of the police in Philadelphia. And there's nothing but great credibility, a cross-section of police people on that task force, including the state trainer for the state of Washington. So let me say this. As much as Chief Coble has said he's adopted these, I do not believe. Because if he did, we wouldn't have seen what happened last week. We wouldn't have seen the last 2 years of people being shot. And in his report with United Way, there is no mention of embracing these 6 pillars that you're going to hear about. And we're encouraging him, the union, the Police and Fire Commission, the mayor, the city council, the county board, and county exec, Joe Parisi, along with the other 60+ units of law enforcement, to bring all the communities together and endorse them. So let me introduce Dr. Anthony Rubin, who's the head of the Urban League.
Good afternoon. Last week, the relationships between the Madison police and communities of color were set back immensely. We saw the disturbing video that showed 2 men severely beating a black teenager, Janelle Larry. Following that, we heard Chief Coble stand behind his troops and publicly send a strong message that the behavior of these officers were within the realm of standard behavior. Let's never let that type of behavior become standard here in Madison. Right? We can't tolerate that. As a result, many of us expressed outrage and began working in harmony to make it clear that people of color will never stand silent and let the police or anyone else treat people of color or anybody in this manner. Our history has taught us that all legal policies are not necessarily just. All legal policies are not necessarily just. We know that the police have broad latitude to use force, but it is morally wrong to apply it the way that they did against Janelle Larry. Unjust policies and laws have no place in the 21st century. Moving forward, we must continue to be vigilant and take steps to make sure that the use of excessive force does not become the norm for police in Madison. We care just as much about police safety as we do about the safety of the public. They have dangerous and important work to do, but it is important that we emphasize to young people that you don't resist when they're encountered by the police. But at the same time, we can't tolerate the police using excessive force, even though the current policies say that they have the discretion to use whatever they need to arrest in a particular situation. So we need public education around this issue. I think it's important. We need public education about how to not resist and things that you can do, things that young people can do not to be beat up by the police. And we also need the police to have the proper training and de-escalation tactics so they're not beating up someone. So the other thing that we have to do is we have to have a balanced narrative from the media, from public officials when things like this happen. Right. We have to speak the truth and tell both sides of the story. Right. You know, the narrative says that the police were victims, but I think that young lady was victimized to some extent as well. Right? And so I think the media and public officials must stand up. They have to stand up and tell a balanced story and make sure that young people are not getting hurt and that young people are not damaged and that we don't let this excessive use of force become the norm here in Madison. Young people have to learn not to resist, and we got to work on that. But at the same time, we have to continue to express that Madison should never become the type of place that these unjust laws will persist. So both sides have to do work. And I think this 21st Century report that you're going to hear about today has a lot of things that we can use here in Madison to move us forward. Thank you.
Let me just add, before we introduce Representative Chris Taylor, who then will introduce former Police Chief David Cooper. 16 years ago, I actually had no gray hair, but I was asked to chair the task force on race relations because of the complaints the city was getting on racial profiling in African American citizens, Hispanic, and Asian. Our police chief was a person of color. He said none of that was going on, plus show me the data. But there was no data because they didn't collect data. He did not resist. He and the union worked with all of us in the community for over 6 months. We had a task force that was broadly based of people with a lot of different opinions, and it was heated. But the fact of the matter, all of a sudden we came to consensus and started to collect data. We didn't accept the minimum standards from the state, and that was adopted by the county and adopted by the legislature. And then it was in full for every unit enforcement in the state until Scott Walker eliminated it in 2011. So this is not just a city issue or a county issue, it's a state issue. So please welcome Representative Chris Taylor.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you to you all for being here. I really, really appreciate it, and I'm really honored to stand with the people behind me to address this really serious issue. You know, the task force that President Obama convened was very, very diverse. It was a multidisciplinary task force composed of civil rights leaders, composed of racial justice advocates, law enforcement professors, and attorneys. And what they did was identify best practices. They gave us a roadmap of how to really embrace 21st century tactics to make sure that communities are engaged. This is about communities. It's about strong, safe communities, and that communities do have a voice. One recommendation that I was so taken by is this concept of the police, not as warriors, not as individuals who go in at war with communities, but as guardians of our rights, as guardians of safety. And that's how trust and legitimacy develops. That's how positive police contact facilitates public confidence that keeps our community safe and keeps police officers safe as well. Some people have asked me, well, why do you care? You're state representative. I represent this neighborhood in the Capitol. And I care so much because, as Nino said, what we're hearing now is, well, we're doing what the state wants us to do. But let me tell you, the state standards are minimum standards. They are not model standards. We need, at the state level, you all know, I will do everything I can to get these principles and these concepts set forth in this task force in our state law. But some of you understand it's hard to advance some progressive policies at this point in the state capitol. But we try, and we will try to do this. But Madison and surrounding communities have an opportunity right now, not to say we're going to do the minimum, to say we're going to be leaders. We're going to embrace these recommendations. We're going to be the model, not the minimum. Yes. And that really is why we're here today. To make this shift from police as warriors to police as guardians, many things have to occur. First of all, communities who have been most impacted by this warrior style of policing have to be heard, listened to, included. and collaborated with. That is absolutely essential. There must be an acknowledgement that there has been, the role of policing has played a role in past and present injustices. That has to be acknowledged before we can move forward. We also must embrace a model of community policing. And we have to actually look back in our history to see that there was a time when we did embrace that model, which emphasizes working with the community, not against the community, listening to the community, including youth in the discussion, identifying problems, collaborating with solutions that produce results that benefit the community and promote the dignity of every individual. The other thing that really has to occur for us to move into the 20th century is acknowledge that there's different training methods. Sure, there's different challenges, but there's also different training methods that we must embrace, such as tactics that emphasize de-escalation. This needs to become a consistent part of training, not just a one-off thing that happens in the academy. A consistent part of training to keep the community safe, to keep individuals safe, and to keep police officers safe. These are just a few of the recommendations that we can embrace right now in our community to move forward together. This report offers really a blueprint of how to move forward, and they're good first steps. But you all, they can't be the last steps. They cannot be the last steps. What we are proposing here today is not the end, but the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. For those who weren't around in the early 70s, and there's a couple of reporters here that are middle-aged like myself, let me set the stage of what it was like for Chief Cooper to come into the Madison Police Department. His first 5 years, almost 10, was pure hell because the union took him to court every single time because he wanted to integrate women and minorities into the police department. They harassed black officers, and I can go into all what went on. He had to fight them tooth and nail, but he went to the community and got the community support. He didn't threaten the city council, he worked with the city council. And he worked with the mayor, and he worked with conservatives, and he worked with liberals. That is who David Cooper is. And since he left, he got religion. He's now a minister. Not to say he didn't have it before. But let me just add this. He's still been engaged. He has a blog. He's written a book that people are reading all over the country and other parts of the world. So if anyone even questioned why he's engaged, you know why? Because he loves the Dane County community and this community. Please welcome former police chief and Reverend David Cooper.
Towards the end of my career, I spent some time traveling around the country for my professional organizations, talking about what we did and what we were doing in Madison. People would come up to me afterwards and say, "Oh, our police department isn't like that at all." And I used to I'd say, "Well, you got to understand that you deserve the kind of police department you've got." So what I'm saying is that we don't deserve this. We don't deserve what's happening. So I want to thank you for coming here today and supporting good policing. That's what it's all about. It's not anti-police. It's supporting good police. I was saying thank you for coming here today for supporting good policing. This isn't being anti-police. This is supporting good policing. And I do this today because I have tried. You say, well, why are you talking behind Chief Koval's back? You should talk to him. And I have repeatedly tried to do that. So I don't come before here with my comments not having made an attempt to, on numerous times, to contact Chief Koval, who doesn't want to meet with me. Secondly, community-oriented policing is exactly what it says. It is for the community. It isn't about policing setting the standards. You set the standards. That's the power of community-oriented policing. And you determine the propriety and also the legitimacy of police policies, operations, and tactics. And I also come before you today to speak as a father of two daughters of color. the reluctance of good cops to, over the years, to correct the bad behavior and criticize the bad cops who will continue to disrespect people and use excessive force keeps police effectively in the dark ages. They really can't progress as long as they can't talk with one another about what's working, what works best for the community, and how do we improve that which we do. So these behaviors of bad policing, however infrequently they may occur, or whatever small percentage they may occur in the hundreds and thousands of police contacts, perhaps, that go on in the Dane County area, all it takes is one. It only takes one to erode the effort of police to rebuild trust and support in their communities. It impedes their growth, it impedes their improvement and their effectiveness. So why has this happened? For a number of reasons, not the least of which was the shift of our nation's police towards militarization and a warrior mentality Chris Taylor talked about. Around our country, citizens have witnessed video accounts of police shootings of unarmed men and women, and many cried out, why did the police have to kill them? And that is a legitimate question. And simply stated, the Graham standard in Graham v. Connor, a 1989 decision, by the way, allows police who feel threatened to use whatever force they need to assuage that fear. And that is too low a standard. And that is why that standard is being used. You see terrible police shootings, you see the district attorney having to use that standard, and you see this whole thing continue to backslide because you say that looks like it's unjust, yet our system is unable to do something about that. So I think our community has been through enough pain and grief and turmoil surrounding the shooting of Paulie Heenan and of Tony Robinson.
Yes.
So do we want to wait for another death, another incident, another tragedy before we demand the current deadly force standard by which police are trained is to be raised? And I'm not the only voice recommending this, that the Graham standard be raised. More recently, the President's Task Force on Policing and leading police chiefs in our nation belonging to the Police Executive Research Forum, an organization which I still belong to, issued guidelines that called for raising the Graham standard and that every police department in the nation have the sanctity of life as the core of their police role. For example, police in the European... This isn't so weird because police in the European Union must sign, the states must sign in there that they will use deadly force only when absolute necessity, an absolute necessity for taking a person's life. But now progressive police departments throughout the nation are beginning to do that. They realize the bar must be raised if they're going to rebuild community trust and support, because if they don't do that, it's not going to be there. And they don't have trust and support, police cannot be effective, nor can they be safe in their jobs. And this means that alternative conflict management and de-escalation techniques must be taught to all police and be the first steps taken in response to disturbed or mentally ill persons.
That's right.
Must be. And let me say this, and let me say it strong, that unless the police are willing to do this, we must demand this, and the police must comply.
Yes.
There is no standing back and saying this issue is non-negotiable.
Right. Because
in a free society, every issue is negotiable.
Yes.
Now with regard to the matter of leadership. In past years, an arrest such as Janelle's was usually confined to a few eyewitnesses. And what police had to say in their defense was accepted. And in most cases, before that day in Ferguson, and days beyond that, the community gave the police the benefit of the doubt. It was an incident that was just merely on paper, no more, no more. In most cities today, and I'm so afraid of this, that the police trust bank is being overdrawn, that there are going to be insufficient funds.
It's depleted.
If the rest of Janelle is going to be deemed legal and appropriate, then we all are in deep, deep trouble.
Yes.
We need to make sure that the changes in policies are made and that police operate with those standards. if not law, then regarding how our police are trained and how they're led. And that is the answer. Well, it's within the law. And then they're going to say, as the head of the state police union said, it's in keeping with our defensive tactics training. That's the way we're trained. Not acceptable. Not acceptable. So in the meantime, what has happened here is the chief has rallied around his officers performing one part, and it's an important one, that of police cheerleader. So, yes, the chief is responsible for the care, the nurturing, and the growth of those whom he leads. Yes, policing is a difficult and dangerous job, and we all must work to support their good efforts. But being a cheerleader is not the only part of a chief's job.
Yeah.
It's not it, no. The other part, and a far more important one, and a more difficult one, is to be everyone's chief.
That's right. Yeah.
Everyone's chief. The chief of the community. The people's direct representative with regard to the quality of police services you receive. To make sure citizens are properly and respectfully treated. To generously listen to their feedback without getting overly defensive, even if it hurts.
Yeah.
So both hats must be worn by a chief of police. One to support and lead police, and the other to represent, protect, and defend the interests of those whom police serve. If the chief fails to do this, persons in the community most vulnerable to police action are helpless in the face of police power.
Right.
Too often, chiefs forget this.
Yeah.
Now back to the Easttown video. I'm sure you've all seen this. You all have an opinion. We see knee strikes, we see multiple taser applications, and a bag put over a young woman's head. Her resistance was broken down, she was finally handcuffed and subdued. These techniques may be taught with regard to what's best for police, right? This way we can protect ourselves. We'll take them down, we'll bounce them on the pavement. But what about the community? What's best for you? And what's best for those in the community who have been historically abused by the police and have a tendency to mistrust them? So without trust and support, police cannot be effective, and their work can become dangerous in neighborhoods that become uncooperative and hostile to them. So how does the arresting question look to those in the community with whom the police are trying to build trust and support? Who should analyze the potential effects of these and other various police tactics? Should they be used against women and teenagers? What about pregnant women? Who should determine whether a potentially effective tactic is appropriate? Something deemed to be lawful, but not the right thing to do. The person who determines this is, of course, the chief. And in the face of his inaction or inability to do this, it's the mayor, the Police and Fire Commission, and the Common Council that needs to step in.
Yes.
Now, I think it's reasonable. We're an educated, cosmopolitan city. So I think it's reasonable to expect that a police department that has historically been thought of itself as being world-class would be able to act with a minimum amount of force and be led by a chief who is bold enough to comfortably wear the two hats. Now, what could the officers have done? I heard that a lot. Well, what do they do? I mean, look at it. Well, they could have allowed time for things to settle down.
Exactly.
Right? Just slow things down. They could have held Janelle in an office within the shopping center until she calmed down.
Yes.
They could have called for a supervisor, or perhaps a female officer of color,
Yes.
to help before they attempted to move her from the shopping center. And they also could have done this, and I know police will shirk at this and say, oh, no. They could have let her go, got a warrant, and arrested her later. Right? So, Madison, we didn't need to have another police racial event, because each one is cumulative and disruptive. And if this one is not thoroughly resolved, the probability of another occurring is quite high. And what the chief needs to do is actively reassure the entire community, and especially our sisters and brothers of color that this will not happen again. We need to have his word and why it will not happen again.
Yes.
And let me say this, that it's never appropriate for the chief to be angry, sarcastic, or bullying. That's what he gets paid for.
Yes.
And if he can't take the heat, should get the heck out of the kitchen.
Yeah!
So the question I have, does the chief's public emotional display on his blog and at the June 6th council meeting send a bad signal to some of his officers? If the chief doesn't have to be emotionally controlled and sensitive to others, maybe they don't either. And it will remain that in the future the chief must listen without getting angry or defensive. It may mean that action must be taken. That others would come in, maybe the mayor, and the president of the Police and Fire Commission, give him a coaching staff so that he understands the wearing of the two hats. So no matter what, corrective action must be taken, and what is being done shared with the community. And this must happen quickly. On September 16th, down at the University of Wisconsin in Platteville, we are having our second annual conference on 21st century policing. Mark your calendars. I invite you to be there. We hope it will be another opportunity, as it was last year, for police and community leaders to sit down around the table and talk to one another about what needs to happen. And that we can come together and we can raise the standard of policing in Madison and across Wisconsin and across the nation. So in the meantime, yes, I'm available to help in any way I can. I ask you to take a look at my blog on WordPress called Improving Police. These, unfortunately, are only a small excerpt from a much larger paper, and I thank you for listening to me, and let us press on together.
Let me just add, I'm going to introduce two of our city council members here, because it's important for them to weigh in on this, because it's very serious, especially what's transpired not just last week, but the week before. And let me also express my bias. I'm a father of two adult daughters who are 32, 35, and I have three incredible granddaughters who are 2, 5, and 9. I would never, ever want any daughter, sister, grandchild to be treated that way. And let me put what we saw last week in context. Either that was poorly trained, or they hired a real mean person. And had that officer did that to a dog, he would have been arrested for animal abuse. So the animal standards are unacceptable. With that, I'd like to introduce Alderman Reese Cheeks, followed by Alderman David Aaron.
Hello, everybody. Hello. My name is David Aarons. Hello. Is it on? Now it's on. Just shut the mic. So I wanted to introduce my colleagues, Samba Polter and Zach Wood, who's making a quick exit here. But anyway, what I wanted to talk about today was an issue that goes beyond training issues and really deals with the immediate issue at hand, which is how are we going to deal with this incident and potentially other similar incidents. I think it's important to realize that the response of the community that we have here has been one that's normally really divisive. We have a divided community, and it's a result of this incident at hand. And that's really not something that's tolerable now or in the long term. This puts, for too many people in the community, and this is not really just a white-black thing, for too many people in the community, the police are perceived now as an adverse body. And when police are involved in the kinds of sensitive work that they have to do, the position of being adverse immediately upon approach is a dangerous one and really leads to the kinds of repeated incidents that we have now. I don't know if you saw there had results of a National Pew Research poll on race, and 50% of whites in America believe that blacks are ill-treated and treated in a discriminatory fashion by the police. That also probably seeps over to their own position as civilians in a police relationship. So this is not, again, a white-black thing, and as an alder and my fellow alders here, we hear these kinds of comments for and against, both that breaks sort of this notion of that this is a white-black issue. So, what should we do? The police chief's immediate response, as was noted, was that this was reasonable conduct, given the context of the situation, which we were not fully aware of. And that he would conduct an internal investigation that would be assisted by the Dane County Sheriff's Office. The Dane County Sheriff's Office is the sister agency of the police department. The police, Madison police arrest individuals and they're jailed by the Sheriff's Office, and they really operate as allied agencies. So having an internal investigation after the police chief announced that he believed, based on his viewing of the situation and discussing it with individuals by the police, that this was okay. It makes really an internal investigation nearly impossible. I mean, is there a lieutenant or anyone else subordinate to the chief that's going to publicly say that the chief was wrong in his conclusion? I don't think that's the case. So we need an outside investigator. It's my understanding that apparently the police chief, Chief Koval, had contacted the Department of Justice, but the Department of Justice refused to provide these investigators. So we need to go elsewhere. But I think that's an appropriate step to take, and one that may address some of the harsh feeling and divisiveness as a result of this. Second, in the longer term, I think the city council should look to establish a public investigation body for incidents of this kind. Currently, we have an investigation if there's a police shooting that results in a death. I think we need to go for other incidents that may not result in a death, fortunately, but which really grab the heart of the community and for which there is extraordinary concern and sensitivity. So I think those are the two things that the council can do. We can require these investigators, and we can begin to set up this kind of review panel that would have police participation in it, but also really have civilian participation, and that's fully transparent. Thank you. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Samba Balder, who represents the 17th District.
I don't have much to say, but what I want to say here is basically we all work. Who is here who does not work? Is there anybody who does not work? We all go to work, right? How many of us are not evaluated either on annual basis or on quarterly basis or every 6 months? How many? All of us. So again, like David said, this is not an issue of black and white. This is a problem within the American society. And so the police call the police when they are in trouble. The citizens call the police when they are in trouble. And so we are all in it together. This is not about the police and the citizen. So we have to establish that trust, whether it is the police or the citizen. So whatever happens here is more about making our society better. Nobody's going to say, because there's a lot of crime committed by black people inside the city of Madison, so I'm going to move to a smaller village outside of the city. in the next 10 years or 20 years, those same black people that you see as troublemakers will also be there. So America is our America. Madison is our Madison. This country is our country. We all have to work hard to make it better. The police are not above the law. We as citizens are not above the law. So we have to hold each other accountable. And as citizens, all of us, we have seen what is going on around the country, and this is filtering down to Madison. We've had, encounters where citizens were killed. We have encountered where we see citizens were brutalized. So all of us as citizens has to come together, and don't see this as police against the rest of the citizens or citizens against the police. But we have to make sure that police are accountable, and as citizens we have to be engaged. If we are not engaged, politicians will not do what is right. I can tell you that since this event happened, how many politicians have you seen come forward and present a plan to the citizen and say this is what we need to do? Nobody. So you, all of us, the citizens, have to call our elected leaders to account for what is happening in the community. Thank you.
And going beyond Madison, a call this morning from the mayor of Fitchburg. Steve asked if he was going to come and participate here in the audience. And I said, boy, talk to your chief and see what he has to say. So he's here to comment, and I think he has a lot to add.
Thank you everyone for coming out, and thanks for organizing this event to highlight the important work that we all have to do. Freedom includes protection of our rights and keeping us safe from bad actors. It includes both the opportunity to do what we want within the law, but also the responsibility to care for each other. There are 28 cities and villages in Dane County. With the State Patrol, the Sheriff, the 911 Center, University Police, State Emergency Management, military branches, and federal agencies, that's a lot of coordination to protect our freedom. The recommended 6 pillars of the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing are a roadmap on which we can and should all agree. They provide a practical framework to organize the work of our law enforcement agencies, particularly when we make changes from business as usual. The City of Madison has the lion's share of population, development, crime, and police officers in Dane County. So it is no surprise that much of the recent police news has involved the Madison Department. While it can't be denied that there's much work still to be done, we should be grateful that the Madison Police Department has been a national leader in community and problem-oriented policing. In many ways, the MPD provides a strong foundation on which we can all build. In other ways, smaller departments have more flexibility to innovate. As a relatively new mayor, I am proud that our police department had already embraced these principles before I took the helm of the city of Fitchburg, and they're busy with implementation. I support the recommendations of the task force and am doing what I can in my role as mayor to support these positive changes. I urge elected officials at every level of government to at least read the executive summary of the final report and ask yourselves how you can advance this important work. The public safety aspect of freedom is a top priority for all of us. Thank you, Nino.
We have a few more speakers that I really think is important to hear, and I'm going to move somebody up, someone who speaks truth to justice, who warned this community right after Ferguson that that was not just an isolated case. It was a symptom of what truly is wrong within the police culture based upon military training. She's also about to have a baby any minute, maybe. And so, please welcome Brandy Grayson, who's the founder of undedited.
All power to the people. All power to the people. All power to the people. Thank you, Nino, for having me here. I just want to remind our community that we have to keep Janelle centered in this. She is a child. She was a child, a high school student that was brutalized by a police officer. And I'm going to disagree with some of the folks standing up here with me. It's definitely about race. As Nino pointed out, if she was a dog, we'd have responded a little bit more differently. If she was a dog, that police officer would have been held accountable. But what she is and was at the time was a black little girl. A black little girl who they decided beforehand was too defiant and too disrespectful to treat as a human. And that is where we need to center this. It's in her humanity, in the humanity of black people everywhere, and specifically in Madison, where white liberals are happy in terms of, like, it's like we live in a reality where white people who say they're for justice and equality rather see process versus justice. And we are demanding justice. We are demanding that the officer is fired. We're demanding the resignation of Chief Koval. We are demanding community control over police. What we do understand is what has been happening within the Madison Police Department and nationwide is the lack of power in our communities. We don't have the power to hold people accountable for when they injure us, whether it's brutally beating one of our children or murdering one of our children. So in the last year, 2 years, we've had a death. One of our baby boys was shot by Madison Police Department, killed, murdered. And we were, instead of us focusing on holding the police accountable, we wanted to examine and analyze the process, right? We wanted to say this is a legality issue, but we're not asking for people to review if it's lawful, as the mayor pointed out yesterday, that it is not about laws, it's about justice, it's about humanity, it's about ethics, it's about morality. And anytime that we can watch a video of a little girl being kneed over and over, tased over and over, and punched in the ribs and dragged and treated like an animal, and our response is, well, what happened before? Does it really matter what happened before? It didn't matter. What mattered is that we had a little girl who was brutalized by a Madison police officer. And until we stop being the nice white liberal Madison, and our city council, and our Dane County Board, and our mayor, and our chief, and everyone else who says they stand for justice, until we put the niceties aside and accept responsibility and accept that this is racism built in white supremacy on the foundation of the genocide of one race and enslavement of the other, then we are walking blind. And we are not making progress until we acknowledge the wounds, because we cannot heal the wounds until we acknowledge the wounds. So let's stop playing, Madison. Let's stop being the nice white liberal Madison who likes to partake in niceties and nice conversations that are comfortable. Because what is happening to our children in the street is not comfortable. They're dying, and they're dying physically, emotionally, and mentally. You think Janelle is the only one that's been beaten and treated like this by Madison Police Department? It happens in our community all the time. And unless someone like us record it, then it's not believable. Because even if the body camera is on it, right? The dash cam is edited. We knew that in Tony Robinson's murder. You watched the edited film, and you knew that the whole story was not being told. And we can't, even if we have body cameras, we can't even hold them accountable for us to see it. It's not even accessible. But what they want to do, and what we've been trying to do in Madison, is just give like a little surface healing. Like, it's okay. We're going to offer her restorative justice. She's going to admit to her wrongs, and yet we're going to say the police is a victim. She's a little girl who was upset at the mall, and if she was white, she would have been given the space to be upset, because I see it downtown on campus all the time. White boys getting mad, fist fighting, acting a fool, and you know what the police come and do? They give them a warning and say, go rest up. So until we have equity, until we have justice, until my people are treated no different than the white people in the street, this is damn sure about race. So don't you drop the race card. Don't you pretend like this is about anything else but racism, white supremacy, and the lack of power in our community. And it is time for community control over the police, meaning that we set the precedents, we set the priorities, we hire and fire, we hold the police accountable, we hold our chief accountable, and we hold everybody accountable that negatively impacts our children in our neighborhood. We are at 75% poverty rate for black children. Janelle is one of them. Homeless. That phone meant the world to her. But because of our privilege, we can't even start to fathom what that phone meant to her. So what I'm saying to us, as Madison community, I don't care care what side you stand on, where you at. This little girl didn't deserve to be treated like an animal in the street. And what I'm going to do is welcome in Adams to explain what community control over police is and to give us more of a concrete understanding. All power to the people.
Let me just add, I chaired the task force on race relations. The whole issue was racial profiling. Long before I chaired that, I was in a Walmart with Errol Davis, who was CEO of Wisconsin Power and Light, African American. We were lousy golfers and we needed to pick up at least 4 more dozens golf balls. We bought them together. We were walking, we paid for it, walked out. He got stopped and was accused of shoplifting because he was a black man. Yes. And thank goodness back then, when he resisted and refused, and when the police came, they de-escalated, they apologized. And let me say this about Madison. I'm born, raised, educated here. Dominic Amato and Tony Schiavo and Angela Alioto came here to flee the fascism in Europe, came to this country, settled in the Green Bush of South Madison, and they too were discriminated against. In fact, people used to ask, what part of the South are you from? Because we were olive colored. But that's Madison. The elephant in the room is the fact that this community goes along to get along, and they don't want anyone to rock the boat. But because of that mentality, and let me be frank, United Way had asked David Cooper to be part of that collaboration with the Madison Police Department and the NAACP. When Chuck Koval learned that Cooper was going to be there, he said, I will not participate if he's at the table. So it's time that the United Way steps up and start reaching out and be a leader. I love the new director. Renee Mose is a good person, and it's time for change. And let me just, I'm going to have you have John Hendrick, who's former chair of the County Board of Supervisors, talk about the role of the county, and then I'm going to have you. Okay?
So I'll be very brief. So, on...
Everybody, M. Adams.
So, I think it was 2 Tuesdays ago, maybe this Tuesday, when Janelle was beaten and assaulted and tased and brutalized at Easttown Mall, that same Tuesday, maybe 10, 20 minutes away, there was Tessa Lee Kellogg, who's a white woman, who crashed her moped. I think maybe she was using drugs. She crashed her moped into someone, a car or something. The police came to arrest her. She resisted arrest. She kicked the officer, she ran, and she was not tased, beaten, MMA-style knee, brutalized. What was the difference, right? So in both instances, you have the same exact laws in place, you have the same exact culture in place, you have the same exact actors, officials, lawmakers, and police leaders in place. The difference was race. So why is it that a police officer thinks he can assault a black girl, but not assault a white woman? It is because the police is accountable to the white community. The police are not accountable to low-income black communities. We cannot have accountability without power. So we are demanding community control over the police. Control being operative. We are not asking for police officers to play nice, right, through some facade of community policing and play basketball with our kids. Because there was a police officer playing basketball somewhere while Janelle was being beat. There was a police officer handing out baseball cards while Janelle was being beat. And there was a police endorsement of some social event while Janelle is being beat, right? We are not asking for what people are describing as nicer police officers. We are demanding control over a system that should be serving us. And control to us means we, the community, have the power to hire and fire the police officer. If it was up to the community, we would have fired Matt Kinney a long time ago. When Matt Kinney killed the first unarmed person, we would not have given him an award and said, great job, keep policing. And then when he killed Tony Robinson, we wouldn't say, you're doing such a great job, why don't you go and train officers, right? We demand the power to hire and fire the police officers. Police officers also need to live in the communities in which they serve. No more of these police officers living God knows where and driving into South Madison. No more of that, right? if you really want to have a security, a safety mechanism, it has to be built from and developed within that community. We also demand the power to determine the policies, the practices, and the priorities of the police. We get to say what is just policing. We get to say what is safety. To us, Janelle was always important to be safe. Janelle would never stop being our community, right? Janelle never stopped being human to us. We never thought that a argument in Taco Bell was worth Janelle's safety, right? We never thought Tony Robinson getting in a fight was more important than him being alive. We would have never made those choices, right? We demand the power to be able to determine what that is. We recently wrote an article, if you want to learn more about community control of the police. It's in the Wisconsin Law Review. We'll also be doing presentations. We demand community control over the police. The police can do whatever they want to do in our communities, to our communities, both in Madison, nationwide, and also around the world, because black community doesn't have power over the police. There is no accountability without power. We are not demanding a seat at the table. We are demanding complete control over the police.
Add two things. One, I teach women law and social control at UW-Platteville, along with Introduction to Criminal Justice. And what she just described is exactly what women's suffrage went through. The male and pales who dominated the system refused to have women at the table. So it is the same in many ways. And let me say, too, that what she just described about citizenry and control is the whole concept behind 21st century policing. It's about changing the warrior military mentality to that of guardians. And let me just also add, can't find it here, but if you Google the top 10 worst hazardous jobs where people get killed, the police department is not in there. It is forestry, it is lumber, it is people working with heavy equipment. And that's not to lessen the dangers that police have. And yes, they need to be trained as warriors, but only when it's absolutely necessary. Now, there's a gentleman here who is head of the Dane County Board of Supervisors. For full disclaimer, he is our director of the Young Law Center at CWAG. He has done more to prevent financial elder abuse, consumer fraud, and he was engaged in these issues 16 years ago. He's engaged now. Please welcome Attorney John Hendrick.
Thank you, Dino. Before my very brief remarks, I just want to thank the members of the community that came here to demand justice. Thank you to Brandy Grayson. I know you're still there. Thank you, M. Adams. And thank you to the elected officials, some of them behind me, some that I see in the crowd, state, county, and city officials that come to join in that demand for justice. We are not going to let this voice be silenced. We are not going to let this voice be lonely. I have the utmost respect for police departments and for the men and women who do an important job in difficult circumstances. It is for that reason that we must speak out, black and white together. We must speak out when something goes terribly wrong in a police department. I began to see this current problem with excessive force when my neighbor Paulie Heenan was killed by a police officer around the corner from my house. As was mentioned before, I think all of us saw this problem of racism and excessive force when a young man in my neighborhood named Tony Terrell Robinson was killed by a police officer. And today we're here because of a video of an arrest of a young woman at Easttown Mall by Madison police officers. I have been appalled by the officials and citizens that try to justify the violence in that video to a 105-pound teenager. If what we saw in that video is consistent with Madison Police Department training, then the training needs to change. The person responsible for that training needs to change. And the leadership of this department needs to change. Thank you.
The last and final speaker is a gentleman who, quite frankly, I knew his father 16 years ago, even before that, and he was just a little kid. And Steve Bronigan, sorry. was our ex-officio member of the Task Force on Race Relations. Steve was head of the Urban League. He was there all the time. He used to bring his son Matt with him. Well, I haven't seen Matt since those days, but I've heard him, and he speaks truth and justice like his dad. So please welcome Matt.
Thank you. As I wrap up here, I really need to highlight some of the things that have been said. We need to remember here, Janelle was brutalized. She was a victim. She shouldn't have to go and be on parole light and apologize to those that victimized her and beat her. They beat her. They kneed her, they punched her, they put her head and face in the street. No matter what happened in the mall, this was unacceptable behavior. But what can we expect when this police department is headed by a police chief that will go in and bully and yell at elected representatives, that will go off and spew basically really dog whistle and racial coding politics that is equivalent of things that we've heard from Donald Trump? What can we expect from our police department in treating our young black women, young black girls with respect and humanity and dignity, and trying to step back and de-escalate? The officer that came in and escalated the situation was trained with our mental health training and is on the team for cultural competency. Exactly, it's a joke. This police department is a joke. This police chief is a joke. He wants to stand in front and protect his officers that he is responsible for. He wants to talk about personal responsibility. Be responsible for your officers. They want to talk about personal responsibility for Janelle. Be personally responsible for the 11-to-1 arrest ratio we have in this city. Be responsible for 75% of the black children living in this city. Right here, right now, we need to be responsible for the society that we create, for the poverty living in this city that we are created. He wanted to expand our police force, wants to expand our police force, got criticized at the Common Council for wanting to do an audit of his police department. We have already about 40 more officers than other cities our size. That is millions of dollars more for a $65 million police budget every year, yet he wants to complain about $400,000? We have millions more than what we actually need. I say he pushed back and he said, police don't address poverty. He's right, police don't address poverty. So why are we spending millions of dollars more on our police that aren't addressing poverty in our city? He is irresponsible, he's bullied, and he's a racist. Our police department reflects the head of it. He needs to go. He needs to be gone, he needs to resign or be fired. Either way, any changes that we try to put in place, he will resist. His police will resist because he is the face, he is the head of that. So anything from this police, from the 21st century police report and recommendations to anything from the ad hoc that comes from it, he will resist and push back, particularly on anything when it comes to use of force spectrum, that is not somebody that we can have and actually look forward to changes that we made. So any way that we can do changes, he needs to go first. That is the first step to the changes that need to be made, that must be made, that is imperative to be made to our police department. Thank you.
Let me just comment. This was the private sector, and that was an individual who was in charge of security at a corporation that would have been fired immediately. There is due process, however. Okay? We have spoken loud. I think we revealed a lot. We now understand why the chief does not want a $400,000 study to go forward by an independent body, because we're going to find some things that maybe he doesn't want us to know. But he now has the ball in his court. He can work with us, the city council, the county board supervisors, and the mayor and the county exec, State Representative Chris Taylor, and the young, gifted, and black community. If he works with us, great. But if he doesn't, then we have no other choice. Thank you very much for coming. Any questions you want to